So I decided to make a follow-up video to my previous video about The Last of Us Part 2, because about an hour after I released that video, the state of play for The Last of Us Part 2 was released, and I felt like we got enough new information on the story and gameplay as well that I could make a second video to kind of follow it up on. So I'm going to go over some of the new things that we know and how it is that they kind of relate back to my previous video. So if you have not watched my previous video where I kind of break down the story leaks as well as what my own take on the story is, I would highly recommend watching that so you get a little bit of a better idea as to what I'm going to be talking about later on in this video. If you don't want to be spoiled, again, I will be talking about spoilers towards the end of the video, so feel free to watch it up until that point, and I'll make sure to mark when it is that the spoilers are going to start. So, without further ado, let's go ahead and get into it. So I'm going to start off with the gameplay that we saw, and I'm going to kind of split it in between two different parts. First part I'm going to be going over the enemies, and then later on I'm going to be going over the new gameplay elements that will play a part in The Last of Us 2. So seems like what it's going to be is split between two warring factions, just kind of building off of what we already knew. We knew that there was going to be a religious cult, now we know that there is in fact a second group, a militia, and they are the Washington Liberation Front, also known as the WLF. It appears that they have the largest control over the city. They have at least a hospital taken over, and I'm going to guess a lot more as well. But again, all that we really see is the hospital in the gameplay. They apparently kill trespassers, which appears to be a thing that the religious cult also does, but this one maybe more so. And then the biggest aspect of this group is that they do have guard dogs, and that these guard dogs are able to track you by your scent. You can see the scent trail when you go into listen mode, which isn't anything really new. We've known that they're going to have guard dogs and everything. It's interesting to know that it's going to be specific to the Washington Liberation Front. They did gleam over the Seraphites, which is the religious cult that is in the game. So they are religious zealots. They're very tribalistic. They also seem to prefer using more stealthy options, like bows and arrows, which again we kind of already knew from some of the trailers as well as the gameplay that's been released. I am definitely intrigued to see how they implement this, like how it's going to feel fighting against the Seraphites versus the Washington Liberation Front, and I feel like we're going to get quite a different experience depending on which enemy group it is that we're fighting. And then the last part, of course, is the infected, the thing that's kind of selling the game. It is confirmed at this point that the 4 types of infected from the previous Last of Us are going to make a return. Those 4 being runners, stalkers, clickers, and bloaters. Now, one of the things that I definitely noticed was that the stalkers look a lot different than they do in the previous Last of Us. I couldn't find any photos of it or screen grabs from the state of play where they show the stalkers, but they look much better. In the first Last of Us, they really kind of just looked like the runners, but with less clothing, to the point where the first time I played The Last of Us, I thought they were the same enemy. And then when I played the remaster, they did change them just enough that they do appear to be different enemies. This time, they genuinely look like the second stage of infection. They look like they are halfway to being a clicker. They do cover that runners are going to be more numerous in the sequel, as well as more deadly. And it just looks like overall the infected in general are going to be a lot more deadly than in the previous game. So I'm intrigued to see how gameplay is going to be different when it comes to fighting the infected. I'm also going to be intrigued to see how many infected they can get on screen at once. I'm currently replaying the original Last of Us, and it seems like the most enemies that you fight on screen at one time is about 5 to 6, and I'm just going to be intrigued to see if they get groups of 10, 15, maybe, groups of infected or even just regular enemies at the same time. And then we are shown the new infected. They only confirmed one new type of infected so far, however, they did say that there are other types of infected that you will find in the game. Personally, I do believe we're probably going to get 3 to 4 new infected types, so effectively doubling the number of infected that we're already used to. The one new type of infected that is confirmed is the Shambler. So the Shamblers are an infected that's covered with pustules that when it senses that an enemy is nearby, it's going to kind of release spores into the air. These are corrosive spores that do damage. I have an issue with this enemy because it makes it feel it feels like a video game enemy. In the previous game, all of the enemies felt like if the world had ended due to this infection, these are enemies you're going to come across. You're going to come across newly infected. You're going to come across slightly older infected who have to hunt in a different way. You're going to come across blind ones that are really dangerous. You're going to come across super old infected who have huge growths of fungus on them that protect them from bullets, make them a lot more damage resistant. And even with the bloaters throwing those like spore bombs, it kind of makes a little bit of sense that they would throw these spore bombs and that they would hurt Joel. But we're playing as Ellie, who is immune to the cordyceps infection. Why would a spore attack hurt her? It just feels very, very video game enemy-esque. It felt like we need an AoE attack in case, we're probably going to encounter these enemies a lot in confined areas. And they're like, we need an attack that's going to do well in this confined area. Let's have an enemy that releases an AoE spore attack. And then as I mentioned earlier, they did say that there's going to be more terrifying and lethal forms of infected. And when they said that, they then play what sounds like a growl and like a scream. For me, that was Naughty Dog kind of hinting at infected animals. There is a zoo in Seattle. I would not be shocked if we see infected bears as well as infected lions, maybe. Infected wolves would be cool as well. I just don't want it to be like infected dogs. You have regular dogs and then infected dogs. I want it to play different when you're fighting these enemies. If they do go with a infected dog type of enemy. There's actually even concept art of The Last of Us 2 that I found on Reddit that it's some sort of infected animal. There's also fan art of a bunch of different infected animals. I really feel like they're going to probably do like an infected bear or something like that. I would like to see a faster infected animal, if that's what they do, like wolves or even like infected monkeys. We know that in the original Last of Us there were tests done on monkeys with the cordyceps infection. It would be interesting to see if the cordyceps finally made the jump to other primates. The only other thing that I could think of, the new infected being would maybe be a faster, more deadly human infected, or even an infected that takes multiple bodies to make. So like a just absolutely massive kind of bloater-esque enemy, I think would be very interesting to see. Again, I don't know, but I'm going to guess we're probably going to see between 3 to 4 new infected types. And then the other thing that they do talk about is that you will see these groups interact with each other over the course of the game. When they say that, they specifically show Ellie alerting some clickers to a group of militia who are then attacked by the clickers and kind of chased off by them. And I like this because in the previous game, you never fight 2 groups of enemy at the same time. You're never fighting infected as well as soldiers. You're never fighting infected as well as other survivors. You're fighting infected in like a confined area. Then you go to the next area, and now all of a sudden you're fighting, highwaymen. Then you go to the next area, now you're fighting infected again. Okay, then you go to the next area, now you're fighting more highwaymen. It's these small contained areas with linear paths in between. And I like that they're now in the second game going to make it a little bit more kind of faction-y where they fight each other. And to me it makes more sense. Again, they want this to be a grounded experience. It would make sense that the enemies would come across each other and they would fight each other. I'm just intrigued to see how organic it's going to be. Like, will Ellie just stumble across a group of militia fighting infected? Will we stumble across a group of Seraphites as well as militia fighting? Will we see all 3 fighting at one time? And how involved does the player need to be? Will it be like, there's a group of clickers over here, there's a group of militia, and then Ellie throws a bottle, it alerts the clickers to the position of the militia, and then the militia starts fighting them. I'm just intrigued to see how this will all kind of work together in the game. The next thing I'm going to talk about are the new gameplay elements that they talked about, as well as the improved elements from the previous game. They do talk about some new traversal mechanics, the main ones being Ellie has a jump button, a dedicated jump button. I am intrigued to see how this ends up playing out. If you remember from the first game, Joel could just vault over cover. He would jump at some times, but it wasn't because he had a dedicated jump button. I'm intrigued to see how this will just kind of play out, how it will feel, what the results will be on the gameplay. The other thing that they talk about are ropes. Ellie's going to be able to use ropes. It looks like she's able to throw them, as well as maybe just find them throughout the game. And it will allow you to access different areas, different narrative options, things like that. I am genuinely intrigued to see how this is all going to kind of play out. Obviously, this is them just kind of copying the mechanics from the Uncharted 4 gameplay, where Nathan Drake has like a grappling hook. So I'm intrigued to see how big of a part this is going to end up playing. They also talk about stealth in the game, specifically that there's going to be kind of a analog stealth to it, where tall grass doesn't just hide you completely anymore. If enemies get close enough to you, they can see Ellie through the tall grass, which is pretty awesome. We saw in the one gameplay trailer, it doesn't seem to be very far for them to not be able to see her in the grass. So I'm intrigued to see how that kind of plays out, how far away an enemy has to be. And it's kind of a nice change, and I hope that this ends up getting carried over into other games as well, like the Horizon Zero Dawn sequel or the Days Gone sequel. Both of those games, unless an enemy walked through the grass and hit you, they're not going to find you in tall grass. Even if your character's head is poking up out of the grass and looking directly at the enemy, they don't notice you in tall grass. So it's nice to see like an analog stealth maybe becoming an industry norm. Well, I kind of have to wait and see. In addition to that, they also go over the combat. It seems like a hide and seek kind of style of combat is going to be used more in this game than in the previous Last of Us. With the original Last of Us, Joel could kind of tank it, unless you had absolutely no ammo, you would be able to easily just kind of gun enemies down if you just lined up a couple of headshots. And I'm intrigued to see how a more hide and seek style gameplay will be. Ellie is a little bit more frail than Joel, but she is more agile. She can sprint away from encounters, go hide, break the line of sight, and then maybe take enemies down one at a time like that. They also do, again, cover that there's going to be a dodge mechanic involved now. It seems to be a pretty usable option. The fights that we see Ellie get into seems like they're actually going to be kind of tough fights. Like taking an enemy head-on is going to be not a super viable option, and the dodge mechanic is going to be super important. It also looked like there maybe will be counter moves that Ellie can do with the dodge, but we're just going to kind of have to wait and see. And then the last thing that they go over in terms of combat is that Ellie won't be alone in her quest. There will be other characters who come along with her and fight with her. One of the ones that they really showed was Jesse being in Seattle, fighting alongside Ellie. And it seems like they're pretty involved. And not that in the previous game they weren't involved. I want to see a little bit more out of them. It seems like they can actually fight and take out an enemy this time, as opposed to just shooting haphazardly at an enemy or like hitting them just enough that when Joel finally shot them, it would feel like they had done a little bit of something. It seems like they can actually take on enemies this time. And hopefully they fixed it where they don't just sprint around while a clicker is nearby and the clicker has no idea that they're there, but the minute Joel steps on a slightly broken piece of glass and it crunches under his foot, the clicker's all over him. I really hope that has been changed from the previous game, but we're going to just kind of have to wait and see. Naughty Dog also touches on the new crafting and upgrades system that they have. It seems to just be a little bit more expanded on from the previous game. And they say that it supports multiple different play styles. You can't get all the upgrades in a single playthrough. So it seems like you do have to kind of pick and choose. It seems like it might be possible to miss upgrades. It seems like the upgrades are really dependent on if you find a magazine, and then Ellie will learn the upgrade. This could also be limited to difficulty, where if you play on an easier mode, it's easier for the player to find upgrades as well as, pay for the upgrades. If you play on a harder difficulty, you might not get nearly as many upgrades available to you as a player would on an easier difficulty. The only thing I do think would be weird, especially since they talk about how agile Ellie is, how she is going to play a little bit different than Joel, is have it where the player can accidentally make a tank version of Ellie, where she can just be a bullet sponge, and the dodge mechanic kind of goes away. You don't have to worry about health all that much. I think that would be really weird to end up happening. Obviously, it won't be like a true tank. She probably won't be as resilient in that way, but I do think it'd be weird, it would be weird to see it where if Ellie gets shot like 20 times, she just kind of shrugs it off. And then it also seems like they're going to make the upgrading weapons a little bit more specific. So as opposed to, make it feel a little bit more like I use this rifle all the time, I want to upgrade the rifle, make it a bit more adept to your play style. Or if you use the bow a lot, have Ellie upgrade the bow and have that be her main weapon. It also looks like you're able to craft some more things this time around, as opposed to just being like Molotovs, health kits, and bombs. It seems like Ellie can craft different types of arrows, explosive arrows, maybe even regular arrows, so you always have a supply of ammo. She can also make silencers for her pistols, as well as Molotovs and bombs from the previous game. Definitely intrigued to see how much more they expand on the crafting and upgrade system when I actually play the game. And then this last part, I'm just going to kind of talk about the story that was covered, or the things that were revealed in the state of play. Now, there's no actual plot points given in the state of play that we didn't already know. They just kind of touched on the environments a little bit more. So one of the main things that they do talk about is that the game's going to take place over multiple seasons and climates. So I really feel like we're going to get a similar layout to the first Last of Us, where The Last of Us started in started in summer, and then we go to fall, winter, and then spring. But I feel like this time around we're going to start with winter, because it seems like the opening area is in Jackson in winter. They also stated that most of the game is going to take place in Seattle. So since the game is anywhere from 20 to 30 hours long, I'm going to guess between 10 to 20 hours of it is going to be spent in Seattle. So we're probably going to have like 5 hours in Jackson, 5 hours in between Jackson and Seattle, and then the rest of the game is going to be spent in Seattle. The other thing that they touch on is that there's going to be kind of open areas that are so big and expansive that you're going to have to use a horse to navigate it, and they also show a boat, that some of the areas are very flooded, so you need to use a boat to navigate. I feel like what we're probably going to get, it seems like they're trying to make it seem like you're going to have like these big open areas. You can kind of go wherever it is that you want. There's going to be something going on over here, something going on over there. You might miss this thing. You might not find that thing. But I feel like what we're probably going to end up having is an experience very similar to 2018's God of War, where we kind of have like a faux open world. It's not this close, tiny corridor kind of thing that we did have in the previous Last of Us. I think what we're probably going to have is just like a open area, like 3 or 4 different areas that you go to at different points in the game. And then the main missions and main story things are going to be these very linear, point-by-point things that you go through once and then you never come back to again. We can even kind of see this in the hospital level that they show, where Ellie starts off in what seems to be a pretty open area, and then it immediately goes into her swimming through a canal, her ending up in the hospital, having to kill a couple of guards in a kind of open area, making her way to the actual hospital, and then going through a bunch of corridors and stuff. I feel like that's, we're not going to get this semi-open world. We're going to have a kind of a fake open world. And then the last thing I want to talk about is going to be the connection to my story theory. So if you did not watch the first video, again, I'd recommend you watch that so you know what my theory on the story is. I also would recommend that if you are trying to avoid any spoilers whatsoever, that you do kind of click off this video now so you can experience the game in your fullest. If you have somehow gotten past spoilers at this point, do your best to stay away from the spoilers and just kind of click off this video. Alright, so if you're still here, I'm just gonna go ahead and assume you've either watched my video or you know about the spoilers. And I'm gonna kind of go over what things that were shown in the state of play connect to my theory. So the first thing I want to talk about is the opening dialogue with Joel, where they're kind of giving you a quick recap of the very end of The Last of Us, where Joel goes through the Firefly compound, grabs Ellie off of the surgeon's table, and leaves with her in the truck. I really feel that this opening dialogue is Joel explaining to Abby why he massacred the Fireflies, why he killed her father. I feel like he is going to say this, Ellie's going to be present, she's going to hear all of it. That's what I feel this bit of dialogue is Abby asks him why, that's Joel's explanation, or part of Joel's explanation, and then Abby does kill Joel. The other thing that I noticed, and I've watched this a couple of times, is that, again, they draw emphasis on Ellie's hand shaking. They, again, show the scene from the initial reveal trailer where Abby's hand is shaking, where Ellie's hand is shaking right before she closes it into a fist, and then they cut to Abby's hand in a fist by her gun holster. Again, and I think that they're showing us this as kind of a clue that Ellie has some sort of substance abuse problem. I'm going to say it's probably she's either become an alcoholic or has some sort of alcohol dependency that is formed. There is a thing called alcoholic neuropathy, which can cause damage to the nerves in the hands. Obviously, that takes years and years and years of abuse of alcohol to develop, which, again, is why I think there's a time jump, but I'm going to be talking about that later. And I think that they're doing that to kind of show that Ellie has some sort of a problem with this. The next thing that they show is this is what I'm gleaming from them showing the whole hospital scene, is that you are going to be going through kind of raiding bases and hideouts of the WLF. You know, it has Ellie going through it to question a specific person on something. Okay, and that specific person, of course, is Nora. I think that Nora was present when Joel died. I think she was part of the small group of WLF that Abby was leading to find Joel and kill Joel. Or she might just be somebody who knows Abby or somebody who knows Ellie from her past. Because, again, Ellie at the end questions her if she knows her. And then Ellie kind of confirms that, yeah, you do remember who she is. The next thing is going to be talking about the WLF. I think that Abby might be a part of them instead of the Fireflies. The Fireflies might not be in this game at all. In my original video, I did say that I think Abby is still part of the Fireflies. However, I think now that she is part of the WLF, there's also, I think she's probably a lieutenant or someone higher up in the WLF. Not so much when the game first starts, but definitely later on I think she's probably some sort of a lieutenant. We do overhear a little bit of some of the people talking about Abby, saying that she recommended that they beefed up security. Doesn't necessarily mean that she is absolutely part of the WLF. She could be a Firefly, and they've kind of integrated themselves into the WLF. We'll just kind of have to wait and see. There's also, at the very, very beginning, they mention that a girl has escaped. They say that she has escaped, and that they're still looking for her. And Ellie says, what the fuck are they talking about? Like, who's escaped? Originally I thought this was Abby that they were kind of hinting at, so I was like, oh, Fireflies are definitely present. Abby's part of the Fireflies. And then, again, one of the WLF is talking about Abby, so I kind of shot that out of the sky. I do now think that this escaped girl might be a second immune, or somebody who is immune to the cordyceps infection. We're just going to kind of have to wait and see. We also overhear some of the WLF members talk about the leader of the WLF, a guy named Isaac. We don't really know too much about who Isaac is. We do know that they talk about that Isaac at one point tried to attack the Seraphite cult's base at some point, and it does not seem like it worked out, based on the fact that the two sides are still fighting. And again, this makes me wonder if the Seraphites are kind of holed up in the University of Washington, where there is a pathology lab present, a pathology research lab, which again makes me think that the WLF or Abby or someone is still looking for a cure, and that's why they wanted to attack the Seraphites base. But again, we're going to have to wait and see what the true story is when the game comes out. And then the last thing I want to talk about is that time jump. Again, I still really think that the time jump is present. I don't know how much of a time jump it's going to be. It might be, as little as a year, might be 3 years, it might be what I originally said, which is 5 years. I don't think it's 5 years anymore. I think it might be a little bit shorter than that, but, we're just gonna have to wait and see how the game kind of plays out, but I do really think that there's time jump presence. Alright, so those are all the major points that are covered in the Last of Us 2 State of Play that Sony released a little while ago. I just felt like I needed to make a second video, just kind of touching on it, as well as how certain things relate back to my theory. Again, I'd really recommend you check out that video so that you get a little bit more context as to what my theory for the Last of Us 2 story is. If you enjoyed this, feel free to leave a comment below telling me your thoughts. And also feel free to subscribe, like the video, or don't, whichever you would like to do. I am working on getting a capture card, so I'm hoping to expand on what type of videos I can make. And hopefully this will be the last video where it's just still images and I can get some gameplay going for this. And this will probably be the last video I make until The Last of Us 2 comes out. If any new developments or anything happen, I will make another video on it. Until then, I hope you enjoyed the video, and I hope to see you guys next time.